Let's start. Assalamu alaikum and welcome again to this first in its kind in 2025 World Vision Organization uh, webinars. As per the agenda, we can move immediately to our opening remarks delivered by the chairman of the board of director of the World Vision Organization. Can we project Dr. Mohammed opening remarks, please?
Dear friends and colleagues, it is a pleasure to welcome you to today's important webinar where we will explore how Free Zone can navigate and even thrive in the face of the shifting global economic landscape. We are living in an era marked by profound transformation. For decades, global trade was built on the foundation of international cooperation. What began with the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in 1947 and was solidified 30 years ago with the creation of the World Trade Organization, gave rise to a more interconnected, interdependent world economy. But today, this foundation is being redefined. We are witnessing growing uncertainty characterized by new tariffs, protectionist measures, and shifting alliances, which signals a movement away from open global frameworks and toward regional economic partnerships. These developments pose significant challenges to the concept of made in the world, a model in which manufacturing processes depend on components, expertise, and value chains spread across multiple countries and continents. So, what does this mean for free zones? It means that our role is more important than ever. In times of economic friction and geopolitical uncertainty, free zones must not retreat. Instead, we must rise to the occasion as connectors, as facilitators, and as engines of opportunity. We must ask, how can our zones help businesses adapt? How can we support national economic goals in this changing environment? And above all, how can we turn today's challenges into tomorrow's competitive advantage? At the World Free Zones Organization, we are responding to this moment with strategic action. Let me share with you 4 initiatives currently underway. First, we are strengthening our relationship with the World Customs Organization. The aim is to position free zones not merely as beneficiaries of customs processes, but as partners, even as facilitators in making trade more seamless and secure. Second, we have engaged with the International Energy Agency in Paris to develop joint initiatives in the fields of renewable energy. Our Green Free Zones program is designed to help zones transition into clean energy hubs, contributing to both economic resilience and environmental responsibility. Third, we are working with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to explore the potential of agro-industrial free zones. These would support regional food security and unlock new value chains, especially in cold chain logistics, which is increasingly critical in today's fragmented supply networks. Fourth, we are advancing collaboration with United Nations Tourism to promote tourism-oriented free zones, helping countries diversify their economies and attract sustainable investment. Today's webinar opportunity and challenges: how your free zone can help your country navigate the evolving global landscape and tariff dynamics, is timely and essential. Before I end, I would also like to take this opportunity to warmly invite each of you to join us for the World Free Zone Organization 11th World Congress, taking place from October 10th to 12th, 2025 in Hainan, China. Thank you all for joining us. I wish you a productive, insightful, and forward-looking session. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for these opening remarks. In preparation of this webinar, we had several sessions separately and jointly. Dr. Ralph Osa, Dr. Martin Ibarra, and myself, and really what they have prepared is a huge amount of information, huge amount of recommendation that I think I should skip my introductory remarks, give them my minutes in order to really enrich your knowledge and guide you through this somehow, at least a special period of time. The first of our speaker will be Dr. Ralph Osa, Chief Economist of the World Trade Organization, and he will speak in his quality of keynote address. And Ralph, you have 15 minutes to somehow explain to us what is happening in the global panorama.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. What I was thinking I would do today is just give you my perspective on how trade policy has changed and what effect these changes have on the global economy. And I should say at the outset that the views that I express in this presentation are my views and not necessarily the views of the WTO members, so also the WTO Secretariat. So let me start by describing or summarizing a little bit what has happened. And of course, what has happened is that tariffs have gone up in the United States, they have gone up in China, they have also gone up in Canada to some extent in retaliation or in response to the US measures. But what has also gone up, of course, is trade policy uncertainty. And this uncertainty also has a significant effect on the global economy. So what this all means here, I have summarized in two statistics, which I hope you find interesting. So we had calculated at the beginning of the year in January that more than 80% of world trade was still conducted under the MFN tariffs of the WTO. So what are the MFN tariffs? It's the most favored nation tariffs, basically the tariffs that countries have negotiated at the WTO, which was our way to saying that, well, 83% support. So the vast majority of world trade in January was still conducted under WTO terms. So now the question is, well, how has this changed? And you can see here that this has changed significantly. But nevertheless, even though we have these escalating trade policy tensions, it's still the case that the vast majority of world trade is governed by WTO rules. We are now at about 74%. And two statistics help why this MFN share of global merchandise trade is still high. And I think these are two statistics which are anyways useful for you to keep in mind when assessing the current situation. The first statistic is that merchandise trade between the United States and China accounts for only around 3% of global merchandise trade. So it generates a lot of the news because it's the trade between the world's two largest economies, but only generates 3% of world merchandise trade. And second, US merchandise imports account for, I'm not sure I want to say only, but account for 13% of global merchandise imports, which means that 87% of demand comes from the rest of the world. So in other words, the rest of the world is quite large. Now, what does this all mean for international trade? Well, the main point, of course, is that both tariffs as well as the surrounding trade policy uncertainty, of course, have deteriorated the outlook for global trade. I've tried to summarize here our perspective on this in one picture. What you see is our expectation for merchandise trade, for services trade, and also for GDP. And I have three scenarios for each of these series. In blue, you basically see what we would have expected given the policies at the beginning of the year. So this is how. So for example, what we are saying here is that merchandise trade without any of these policy changes would have grown by 2.7%, and that's the volume of world merchandise trade. Then in green, I have for you what came out in our official forecast. So in April, we published this report here, the Global Trade Outlook and Statistics. So when you see GTOS, that refers to Global Trade Outlook and Statistics. And there, for example, we projected that the volume of world merchandise trade would fall by 0.2% this year. So 2.9 percentage points less than it would have been without these trade policy changes. But things are changing a lot this year. So we've already updated this figure because we, of course, now had the agreement between the United States and China. We had the agreement between the United Kingdom and the United States, and we also had changes to the tariffs on car parts. So now we're a little bit more optimistic. So as of today, given the trade policies of today, we would expect the volume of world merchandise trade to grow by 0.3%, the volume of services exports to grow by 4.3%, and GDP at market exchange rates to grow by 2.3%. Maybe one word about services. So people ask, well, how is it that services trade is affected by the trade measures? And the answer is, well, both more or less directly and indirectly. What I mean by more or less directly are transport services. Of course, you need transport services to move goods, so there's a direct connection. But then, of course, also indirectly through GDP effects. Then we also looked at possible ways in which this situation could evolve. In particular, we looked at the possibility of the so-called reciprocal tariffs to be implemented. Those are the tariffs that were announced by the US on April 2nd, if I remember correctly. And then we also look at a scenario where the trade policy uncertainty would spread beyond US trade relations. So at the moment, we take trade policy uncertainty into account, but assume that it's limited to US trade relations. And here we have a scenario where we simulate what would happen if this spreads. So TPU stands for trade policy uncertainty. And what you can see is that the reciprocal tariffs would further deteriorate the outlook, take another 0.3 percentage points off of the baseline forecast. So these bars here are all changes relative to the baseline forecast that I showed you on the previous slide. But what we also see is that there's if the trade policy uncertainty were to spread, meaning if the predictability or the credibility of the rules would be undermined in the rest of the world, this would also have significant effects, simply because, as I said at the beginning, the rest of the world is quite large. One concern among policymakers in various parts of the world, I've heard it particularly in Europe, is what is going to happen with Chinese exports that used to go to the United States. So here I have an analysis on that. Basically, what we expect is we expect bilateral trade between the United States and China to fall by about 40% this year. That's with the lower tariffs, which are still relatively high. And of course, the goods that were exported to the United States by China will try to find other markets. So there's going to be a redirection of trade flows. However, as you can see by the numbers here, I think that is relatively moderate. For example, we expect Chinese exports to Europe to grow by 3% because of that. However, of course, this comes on top of existing concerns by some of these members, some of these regions about overcapacity and issues like that. Now, why do I bring this up? I bring this up because, as I said, the rest of the world is large, and it's of course important to maintain trade policy cooperation in the rest of the world for that reason. And therefore, it is also important to manage these trade redirection effects here responsibly. And I also want to emphasize that I just picked China here because there's these high tariffs between China and the United States, but it's of course not a one-way street. My home country, Germany, is also trying to export cars. Cars face the 25% tariffs, and of course, they will also need other markets. Then we also looked at the picture across regions and across sectors. Let me just summarize this here for you without showing you the detailed results. But if you look across sectors, what you will see is there's a variation depending on the tariffs that are put in place. For example, sectors like metals and motor vehicles are particularly affected simply because we have these steel and aluminum tariffs, and we also have the tariffs on cars and car parts. In contrast, sectors like pharmaceuticals and fossil fuels and petrochemicals are not so affected so far, simply because we don't have that high tariffs in place there. And there's also significant variation in the regional impact. But by far, the strongest impact is in North America. That's not just the United States, it's also Canada and Mexico, simply because this is a region that's highly integrated through international trade and also faces particularly high tariffs. But we also see effects, of course, on South America, Asia, and Europe. One issue that has attracted a lot of attention in the discussions at the WTO is what this all means for least developed countries. So we looked into that, and turns out that least developed countries are highly exposed to the trade policy uncertainty. And one way to understand why this is the case is to recognize that if you look at the reciprocal tariffs which have been announced or have been threatened, if you order them from high to low, 5 of the top 10 reciprocal tariffs pertain to least developed countries. They are, of course, now particularly concerned. These are countries like Cambodia or Lesotho that export a lot to the United States. For example, Lesotho, I think, has about 30,000 people, mostly women, working in a textile industry, making denim products like jeans and so on for the United States. And they would, of course, be heavily impacted by these reciprocal tariffs. We also simulated, therefore, what would happen if LDCs were exempted from any trade policy changes. And I guess you find what you would expect to find. You find that this would be beneficial to LDCs, and it would come at a very low cost for the rest of the world, simply because essentially no cost, essentially because the LDC share of world trade is only a little over 1%. So just to conclude, let me also say that these numbers that I have given you here are based on a state-of-the-art quantitative trade model, which we find useful. But at the same time, I also want to highlight that certain broader macroeconomic risks lie outside the scope of our analysis. For example, we didn't look at the potential impacts for financial markets, and we've seen in the last weeks that these can be significant. We also didn't mean what this implies for sovereign debt sustainability, inflation dynamics, and so on. So there's a lot of economic effects that are also outside of the model. You would also need such a more complete model to assess the impact tariffs have on aggregate trade imbalances, which is, of course, one of the central questions that is driving some of these tariffs. So with that, let me thank you and stop sharing.
Thank you, Ralph, for your presentation, for the key clear messages. Before summarizing these messages, I missed to mention to our esteemed audience that they can share with us their questions their concern. If time allows, we will answer them. If not, my commitment that the recording of this session, the material shared by the speaker, will be in matter of one day shared with them. Allow me, Ralph, in less than 1 minute, summarize what we have said. We speak about the trade war, US-China, knowing that the trade merchandise between the two countries is supposing only 3% of the global trade merchandise. Just before the beginning of the current situation, so beginning of January, the forecast of the growth of the merchandise trade was 2.7%. Immediately after the measures, it decreased to minus 0.2%, and we are seeing somehow, even if it is small and slow, recover to a forecast of 0.3%, knowing that at the same time, more or less, the current situation did not affect more or less the trade in service or service in trade. Of course, you mentioned it and you're right, we have here a significant redirections of the trade flows. So this is supposing there are winners and losers. And of course, there is also some sectors changes. Some of them are most affected, like the metals and the motors. And of course, there are some regions more affected than others, but the worst case scenario, the worst situation is for the less developed country who are really assuming much more impact or suffering much more impact. I now immediately, again, I encourage our audience to share with us their questions. I leave the floor to Dr. Martin Ibarra for his presentation, and immediately after Dr. Martin Ibarra presentation, we will start sharing the questions. Martin, tiene usted 20 minutos. The floor is yours, Dr. Martin Ibarra.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you for the World Free Organization for the invitation. Well, we are going to speak now how turn the new international context into the opportunity for each of the free zone. This is a complementary version of Ralph's presentation. First, I want to begin saying that free zone born in time of global disruptions. Free zone are counter-cyclical tools, stronger in times of disruption than in times of calms. If you see, for example, the first free trade zone in the world in the island of Delos was created because Rome was fighting with the Phoenicians. And then in 1934, the United States created the free zone, the foreign trade zone, after the Great Depression. President Roosevelt was the president who created the foreign trade zone system in the United States. And then post World War II, created the GATT, and they begin the increasing of the free zone in the world. In Vietnam, after the war, they create, now Vietnam has more than 120 free zones. And in China, when the transition for Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping, they create a special economic zone as a key tool for development. And now we are speaking today in Trump #2, in second era of Mr. Donald Trump, that is changing the route of the international trade. Well, Dr. Mohamed Al-Saroni, our chairman, told us about how the World Free Zone Organization are working in the next 10 business in the world. Electric vehicles, data centers, cloud free zones, 3D printing, health and tourism free zones, cross-border e-commerce free zones, smart logistics, copper and aluminum, renewable energy, hydrogen and food. Dr. Mohamed spoke about how to create hubs of food around free zone. Free zone are positioned to become the key accelerator of this next generation business, this 10 best business, the new business in the world. Well, as Dr. Mohamed said before, World Free Zone Organization are working very active with UN tourists to foster the tourist-free zone around the world, with the World Customs Organization to create a better environment between free zone and customs, and to modernize the legislation of custom around free zone procedures, with the International Energy Agency to produce hydrogen and to create a green free zone, and with the FAO to reduce the cost of logistics and production of food in the world. When the GATT was created in 1947, there was 50 free zones around the world. When the World Trade Organization was created 30 years ago, there was 500 free zones. Today, it's an explosion of free zones around the world. Around between 5,000 to 7,000 free zones are in operation in the world. Free zones have become the fastest growing instrument of global trade transformation. Why did free zone emerge? Well, as Dr. Mohamed said, because WTO created the concept made in the world. And the made in the world required neutral spaces to the production of spare parts, to assembled goods, and the logistics are all around the world. For that reason, is explosion of free zone around the world. What happened during Mr. President Trump #1, 2019 to 2021? Look this. He launched a trade war only one country no more, China. And he renegotiated only one free trade agreement from NAFTA to TMEC with Mexico and Canada. And because this, China reduced the share in imports in US market from 22 to 14%. This has a value, these 8 points has a value of almost $300 billion in the US markets. And in the right part of the screen, you can see how other countries utilize this trade war with China to grow their export to the United States in almost $800 billion. You can see this is only not the export, total export, it's only the increasing between 2017 and 2024. Mexico, almost 200 billion, Canada, more than 100, Vietnam, almost 100, Taiwan, South Korea, Ireland, Germany, India, Thailand, and Switzerland. They know exactly how this trade war create opportunity for these countries. When one door closes, many other doors opens. And now, what happened with Mr. Trump #2 government? Today is 120 days of the new government of Trump #2. Trump started the trade only with one country, with the whole country, with the entire world. They signed more than 150 executive orders, emphasis of tariffs, origin compliance, fentanyl, and enforcement. Now we are going to analyze each by each. Why the United States matters? Why is so important the United States? First is the world's largest importer. Last year, the importation of the United States is $3.3 trillion, the 14% of global imports. It's the highest import per capita in the world, almost $10,000 per person, 3 times the world average. historically have a very, very low tariffs. In 2017, 1.4%. In 2024, 2.3%. Today, more than 13%. That means growth 10 times the level of tariff than he began when Mr. Trump began his first mandate. And above that, United States used to have the more flexible e-commerce import system in the world, $800 per day per person, free of taxes. Now this is abolished for China. Well, there are 20 countries who has a very high dependence of US trade. The highest, Mexico, 80%. And you can see in the left side of the screen how Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Canada, Mexico are between 50 to 80%. But other countries, Jamaica, Honduras, Trinidad, Cambodia, Salvador, and others has a high participation. The US is one of the main commercial partners. For those countries are very, very important. For China today, the United States is less important than 8 years ago, because as I told before, 8 years ago was the 22% of the US market, and today is only the 14%. Here is the value of the exportation of some countries to the United States. Again, in the left part of the screen, there are several countries, maybe 10 countries, who export more than $100 billion for the United States. The champion is Mexico, is $500 billion to the United States. China is the second, 462, Canada, Germany, Japan, and so on and so on. For that reason, it's very interesting, it's very important to understand this scenario, to analyze, final part of my presentation, how the free zones can use this new situation to create new business and to create new opportunities. But during these 120 days, what is really in effect today? First, 0% of import taxes from Canada and Mexico if rule of origin of the free trade agreement are met. There are the two most beneficial countries in the world, but if they have, commitments, if they can prove that the origin rule is okay. And the origin rule in TMEC is very, very high, between 50 to 62%, and the half of the trade do not meet this requirement. The second is 10% of import taxes for all countries. But of those 10% will be deductible the US content, if the content is higher than 20%. This is very important for free zone, and now we are going to analyze in deep. Third, 25% of import taxes of steel and aluminum. But if the aluminum is melted or poured in the United States, they will reduce this 25%. Even the 25% applied to vehicles, auto parts, and import for countries buying oils from Venezuela. Another tax of 25% from Mexico and Canada if the goods do not meet origin rules. 30% of Chinese imports. And the last one is 54% of postal shipments, or minimum of $100 per package for cross-border e-commerce. They abolished the de minimis exemption, not only from import tax, for VAT from China. And as I'm going to explain now, China has almost the 80% of the number of packages that arrive per year to the United States. all these tariffs are in addition to each country previous import duties. This is not the only tariff, it's additional tariff to the regular tariff that each country have to pay in the United States. Well, they announced more things. They announced new taxes if the goods came in China's own operated chips, or new tariff for containers that are imported in Chinese-built chips operated by third parties, or $150 per container, per vehicle made outside the United States and transported to the United States, and others. 100% of the Chinese pork grain and 100% of foreign fields and so on. So, but this is an announcement. There are not enforcement in this moment. This is a key aspect. Mr. Trump abolished the minimums of $800 per day per person for China. And as you know, 1 billion of packages arrived today to the United States. You can see the chart in the right part of the screen, how they grow from 400 million to 1 billion of packages per year between 2018 and 2023. And this will force to the companies, so the e-commerce company, instead to send by package by air, to send by containers, pay the import duties, and then make internal e-commerce transportation and e-commerce delivery. For that reason, it's an amazing opportunity for another free zone in the world how to use this tool, because that will create a lot of problems in the e-commerce system into the United States. Next, please. Well, who pay taxes, import taxes in the United States? This is a very interesting chart. The champion is China, grow from $13 billion to $46 billion from 2017 to 2044. Then is Vietnam, 4.3 billion, Japan, 2.2, Germany, 2.2, India, 2.1, and the rest less than $2 billion. You can see how between the 8 years, the first government of Trump and now, the tariffs collected in the United States grow 86%. It's a very, very high level. It's the highest level since the Great Depression in the United States. Next, please. Now we are going to speak. Very interesting thing is, what countries have a preferential access today in the United States? In this chart, you can see the 20 countries in the world that today have a free trade agreement, bilateral free trade agreement with the United States. And in the dot in red, you can see what of those countries have free trade zone, special economic zone, or equivalent like the maquila system in Mexico. It's very important because they don't have to pay custom taxes in the beginning. They only have to pay the additional taxes that Mr. Trump create the 2nd of April. And you can see a lot of countries with this free trade zone than we have a better position to export to the United States with the lower level of taxes. Next, please. The second, in the second chart, you can see, for example, Haiti have a hope system that have an exceptional regime. It's one of the best countries in the world and has free zones. They have a wonderful free zone in the border with the Dominican Republic that can use this youth environment. And then you have the Caribbean-based Economy Recovery Act. And you have a lot of countries like Jamaica, like and another countries, and Curacao, that can use their free zone to have a very preferential access to the United States. In the next chart, you can see the African countries. 32 of the 46, the 54 African countries benefit from AGOA. AGOA is the African Growth Opportunity Act that have a duty-free access to the United States. And you can see in the red dots what of those countries of AGOA has free trade zone, special economic zone, or equivalents. By the way, Ralph said a few minutes ago that this new strategy of Mr. Trump affected 3% of the international trade of goods. That's $1 trillion. $1 trillion is two times the total export of Africa, or one time the total export of Latin America. Next, please.
Martin.
Yes.
Just 5 minutes, please.
Yes. No problem, Samir. And the other 202 countries has a GSP, and you have here the dots with dots. What countries have free trade zone, special economic zone, or equivalent? Next, please. We discovered during the research that 170 countries of the 121 that have some preferential treatment with the United States have free trade zone or special economic zones. This is a very important news, because now in the final minutes of the presentation, we are going to share with you how we can use the free zone to adapt this, how the free zone and special economic zone to challenge into the new business opportunities. Well, the first is attract the business of the future, as I told before. We are in a very interesting moment, shift from globalization to the creation of regional blocks. We have to understand the new geopolitical landscape. Redefine your own unique value proposition. In the future is not the same as the value proposition of the past. Adapt your own narrative to align with today's circumstances. Highlight your unique asset, location, infrastructure, duty-free access, etc. Design a very effective promotion strategy. Piggyback production strategy for your free trade zone or special economic zone. For example, if China is exported to the United States, maybe one other countries who has a very high level of taxes or are very far to the United States, they can make piggyback production in free zones, especially if you are in a country that have a U.S. trade beneficiary access to the market of the United States. Incorporate, this 5 is very important. Study very carefully how you can incorporate input of the United States into the goods, because that will reduce the 25 or the 10%, 25 for steel, aluminum, or 10% for the rest of the product. We have cases in free zones in Latin America and in Colombia, my home country, that will reduce from 10 to 5% these taxes because the incorporation of U.S. content and components into the goods that are exported to the United States. Rethink logistic and production models. Explore production in container or lower cost instead of package, for example, in the case of e-commerce, because these additional taxes is not only of the cost of the goods, it's even applied to the cost of the transportation. This is very important. Avoid origin washing. Your free zone has to be very, very carefully. Then other countries, other companies do not misuse your free zone to this, because the United States Customs, CPB, is going to verify the origin, and the free zone has to be very careful to allow right procedures. And for example, in the U.S. foreign trade zones, there are full of merchandise. A lot of Chinese merchandise that wait in the free zone until Mr. Trump reduced the tax for 145 to 30%, and it have a lot of opportunities in the inshoring new strategy for the United States. Latest news. India and the UK are advancing the negotiation of the free trade agreement. Dominica Republic have two wonderful projects. One is Santiago de los Caballeros, who is adding 200 hectares to the zone, and 760 million investment in Caucedo Port and his neighbor free zone. Brazil is changing the free zone legislation. Costa Rica has more than $1 billion of Johnson & Johnson announced, and we have Peru just approved the special economic zone regime by the Congress. Free zone grows stronger in time of disruption, building resilient and competitive ecosystem. And thank you very much. We are more than happy to, if you have any questions about this presentation. And thank you, Samir, for the invitation.
Martin, impressive. And I will not do what I have done with Dr. Ralph, because he spoke less time and he put much less data. Whatever you have put there is too much to summarize. And allow me, as a moderator, to use the privilege of being a moderator to share one question with Ralph and one question with Martin, and after I will go to the participant question. Ralph, you have heard and you have read and you have listened that after these decision, the current situation, even apocalyptic, somehow diagnostic, and this is the end of the globalization, and especially we have read several times this is the end of the multilateralism. You are the chief economist of a multilateral organization, of the World Trade Organization, and it is supposed that it is an entity that should have, who can play a major role. What is happening, Ralph, with the multilateralism today?
No, thank you. Thank you for the question. And I should say I already tried to answer some of the questions from the chat in writing, so I have to step out in a couple of minutes. But exactly, well, in response to your question, the first thing I would say is that no, globalization is not dead yet, and no, multilateralism is also not dead yet. I showed you at the beginning the figure that 74% of world trade, even today, is still conducted under the MFN tariffs of the WTO. At the same time, I do acknowledge that this is a very serious situation, and I do acknowledge that this is one that we need to manage carefully. And I think one of the risks that I see is that we can have a proliferation of these trade tensions if these trade diversion effects are not cooperatively managed. And we can also get a proliferation of trade tensions if countries now seek bilateral deals with the United States that are possibly not compliant with WTO rules. Now, what is the WTO? And I guess it depends what you mean by the WTO. So the WTO Secretariat, which I'm part of, is doing what we just did now also, which is to provide information to facilitate evidence-based trade policy making. For example, I presented the results I shared with you and some additional details to our members on Monday. They had a general council meeting yesterday and today to discuss, I suppose, also the response to these challenges. But then the second question is, of course, at the end of the day, who's in the driver's seat at the WTO are the WTO members, 166 WTO members. And as I said, they just met yesterday and today to figure out how to respond to this. But for me, I think the key priority is not to make sure that this does not escalate further, so that this does not become even more damaging to the global economy.
Okay. Thank you, Ralph. I just have been observing that you have been very active during the webinar, and you have already answered several questions. I will perhaps ask you a last comment to the special somehow analysis regarding Africa. after decades of negotiation, Africa to manage to, I think 3 4 5 years ago, it doesn't matter, to create the biggest ever free trade area. So it is Africa Free Continental Trade Area. And so was the hope of African country to improve the trade, intra-African trade, to improve the role of the SEZ. But you also mentioned that the most affected countries with this current situation are the least developed. And unfortunately, we have several least developing countries in Africa. Just 1 or 2 minutes, your analysis about Africa situation, please.
I agree with you that continental integration in Africa is absolutely essential, both through the free trade agreement, but also through development of infrastructure. The intracontinental trade share is still relatively low. And yes, LDCs are particularly exposed. We have the Asian LDCs, the Cambodias, but we also have some LDCs in Eastern Africa. And LDCs I mentioned, like Lesotho. So it's a very heterogeneous group. But of course, it's not just about who's most affected. It's also about who's going to be able, or who's going to have the hardest time dealing with the effects. And of course, if you hit Switzerland with a high tariff, it's a different situation than if you hit Lesotho. So this is definitely something we are concerned about, and I hope some resolution can be found.
Thank you so much, Ralph.
Yeah.
And I need to apologize, Dr. Ralph. He asked us to leave 5 minutes before the end of this event for another commitment. Ralph, thank you so much for your presentation. You helped clarifying a lot of points, and we would like to continue counting with you in other activities of our organization. Thank you, Ralph.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. So as expected, the majority of the questions we received were meant for Dr. Martin Ibarra. Let me, Martin, start with the last one we received, or the most fresh one. We received a question from Mary Peter saying that we are a new free zone. We are meant to set up a new free zone. What we have to do from the beginning, setting up a new free zone to take into account.
Okay, Samir. Very good question of Mary. Well, every zone, as a person, as a business, as a country, has to ask himself, what is my value proposition? For what my free zone is the best in the region? For what my free zone is the best in the world? And you can see in several point of view. For example, if you are near the United States, for example, and you have free access, you can import spare parts from the United States to ensemble goods, or to produce goods and export, and reduce the 10% or reduce the 25% in aluminum and steel. But for example, in the case of logistics, for example, you have the case of Jamaica, that is promoting the Caymans Special Economic Zone, that have one of the best harbor, the best port in the Caribbean. And they have the GSP system, the Caribbean system of GSP. And around that, they can create a value proposition. This concept of piggybacking free zone is very, very, very interesting. How a free zone can help another country to use his neighborhood, to use the free trade agreement, to use the green energy, to use the labor as a complementary system. If you see, for example, it's the same that is happening between China and Vietnam today. When Mr. Trump won, put the 25% of import taxes to some high-level products to China, many Chinese company goes to Vietnam or goes to Mexico to make piggyback in their free zones. For that reason, each free zone has to spend a lot of time in defining its value proposition, Samir.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Let me continue also, Martin, with and here I'm taking part of 2 questions coming from 2 anonymous First of all, I need to tell Riham Mohsen that we are speaking about free zone and special economic zones in the same way. Martin, my question to Ralph, it is if the multilateralism is disappearing, and he answered it properly more than ever. It's valid. 75, the three-quarter of the trade is still done within that multilateralism agreement. But what about globalization? Are we having more regional supply chain? Are we having ease within these regional, Middle East, Caribbean, Africa region? Are we having more opportunities for the special economic zones, for example? Or as we have seen, we are having much more clusterization. So you have that, you remember your map in which you showed that a plane is more than 10,000 pieces in 10,000 places. Today, we have the big assembling unit, but surrounded by that 10,000 small producer clustering. So we have more regionalization, more clustering, or we have more nearshoring.
Okay. Samir, in the next 10 years, the free zone and special economic zones will have more opportunity than in the last 10 years, with three reasons. First, the war is creating regional blocks. The war is creating regional blocks. The United States with Canada and Mexico and the Asian countries. Excuse me, I will turn down.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Samir. We are creating regional blocks. For example, the blocks of China, Japan, Korea, they have an integration of 35% of global regional change. The European Union has a 55% of regional value added. United States, Mexico, and Canada. I think I see three tendencies in the next 10 years. First, the creation of regional blocks instead of globalization in far countries. Second, the alignment in political tendencies. This is very important. You know what happened when Germany fight with Mr. Putin and do not have gas in the winter. And third, the reduction of the carbon in the world because the long trips. When you promote the nearshoring or the inshoring, you have to, the transportation has to make 1,000 kilometers instead to 30,000 kilometers that you need to send to Asia from United States to Asia and spare part and bring back the final products. And in these three tendencies, regionalization, creating regional blocks, political alignment, and reduction of the carbon footprint, the free zone have a very important role because allow the change of countries and change of region of many industrial and logistic process. And you can see, for example, now in Mexico, the industrial park, the Maquila park, the free zone has the 98% of occupancy rate. It's amazing. It's a miracle of nearshoring. For that reason, we have to study very carefully how our free zone, each free zone can benefit for this new environment in the international trade and international investments.
Okay. Thank you so much, Martin. We have really an avalanche for question for you, but we need to, I think we need to stop it here. My commitment to all the participants that they will receive a recording of this webinar, the document shared by both speakers, and we commit, I have regards to my friend Eric Otor asking about the situation in US, to my colleague Yerbol, our representative in Kazakhstan, and our regional office, So some concrete question regarding Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Dr. Hassan Al-Kamel from Libya asking about the mining sector, and our colleagues from Mauritius very active. So what I commit with you, tomorrow you will receive a copy of this presentation. You will receive, all of you, a recording of this session. We will summarize all your questions and share them with Dr. Martin Ibarra and Dr. Ralph Osa, and you will have the answer to your question. Again, thank you all for being part of this webinar. I come back to my chairman's speech. We have a big meeting awaiting for us. 10 to 12 of October 2025, the 11th World Congress will take place in Hainan, the island of Hainan in China, in which trade, the contribution of zones to sustainability, the contribution of zones to economic development, the contribution of the trade to the zones of our local prosperity will be analyzed with much more detail. I hope that in matter of 1 month, again, in 1 month, we have our next webinar to deal with other hot topic for our community, and why not even to speak about this same topic if there are really enough new element in it. Again, Martin, thank you. Thank you to Ralph, who was obliged to leave, and thank you to almost our 500 colleagues that have registered with this webinar. Thank you so much, and see you very soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.